All right, let's jump right in. We're about to explore one of the oldest, most foundational promises in the entire Bible. It's a promise all about land, and we're going to see how it goes through this absolutely radical transformation from, a specific plot of Earth to something that's literally cosmic in scale.
So it all really boils down to this one simple but really profound question. What happens to an ancient promise of land when the world completely changes? I mean, does it just fade away? Or does it morph into something more?
Now, to really get where this whole thing is going, we've got to go back, way back to the beginning. We need to get a super clear picture of what the original deal was. So let's take a look at the promise of land as it was first understood. Okay, so in the Old Testament, when you hear the word inheritance, it had a very, very concrete meaning. This wasn't about money or family heirlooms. Nope, it was the specific, physical promise of the land of Canaan to the people of Israel. This land was everything. It was God's blessing, their identity, their place in the world. We're talking real, tangible real estate. But then, you fast forward hundreds of years. Jesus arrives on the scene, and suddenly, the language starts to shift. The writers of the New Testament, they pick up this old idea, and they start talking about a reimagined inheritance.
Okay, get this. The Apostle Paul writes this letter to the Colossians, and in it, he thanks God for qualifying them to share in the inheritance of the saints in the kingdom of the light. Do you hear that word, inheritance? He's totally grabbing that classic Old Testament term, but he's applying it to something completely new, salvation in Christ.
And this right here just lays out the change so clearly. Let's walk through it. On the left, you've got the Old Testament idea. Inheritance was the physical land of Canaan, just for the nation of Israel, a specific spot on a map that was a future promise. But now, look at the right. In the New Testament, that same word points to salvation in Christ, which is for everyone, Jew and Gentile. It's not a place anymore, it's a new relationship with God. And what's really fascinating is that it's this already but not yet kind of reality. So, the really crucial thing to understand is that the promise wasn't just changed, it was massively expanded. That old promise to Abraham, it's now seen as being fulfilled in Christ. And what that means is that through faith, anyone, Jew or Gentile, can become an heir. Like Paul says in Ephesians, the people who were once totally excluded are brought near and get to share in these covenants of promise. It's like the guest list for the party just got blown wide open. And this brings us right to the absolute core of this whole idea. You'll see this pattern again and again and again. Everything is filtered through Christ. The Old Testament promises, they don't just get, transferred to the church. No, they find their primary fulfillment in Jesus first. And then, because his people are united with him, they get to share in that fulfillment. Now, what's really cool is that this wasn't just a one-off thing. It wasn't like they reinterpreted this one idea and called it a day. We see the exact same pattern with a related concept, the idea of rest. So let's keep going and see how this all builds into the idea of entering a greater rest. So the author of the book of Hebrews lays out this absolutely brilliant argument. Let's just trace the logic here, step by step. First, God originally promised rest in the land of Canaan. Simple enough. But second, that first generation of Israelites, they disobeyed, and they didn't get to enter it. So case closed, right? Well, not quite. Third, centuries later, you've got King David in Psalm 95, and he's still talking about a future day of rest, which kind of proves the promise wasn't finished. So the author of Hebrews wraps it all up, and this is step 4, and says this greater, ultimate rest is finally found by partaking in Jesus Christ. The physical land, it was like a signpost pointing to something much, much bigger. And all of this, it's all leading up to the grand finale of the whole biblical story, the ultimate fulfillment of this promise. And it's right here that we see how the end is truly the beginning. Okay, so get ready for something that might just challenge a lot of the popular ideas you've heard. Our ultimate destiny, according to this theology, is not heavenly, but earthly. The book of Revelation just paints this stunning picture. The author John, he says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away." See, this isn't about escaping the earth and floating off to some spiritual realm. It's about heaven coming down to a renewed, redeemed earth. And just look at this incredible symmetry. It's just laid out so beautifully here. The Bible starts in Genesis with the creation of heaven and earth, and it ends in Revelation with a new heaven and a new earth. It's like the whole story comes full circle. In Genesis, humanity is in God's presence. In Revelation, God is dwelling with humanity forever. You've got a river flowing from Eden at the start,
and the river of the water of life at the end. The tree of life was in the first garden, and at the end, it's there for the healing of the nations. The end time perfectly mirrors and completes the beginning. It's amazing.
So here's the bottom line. The promise of the land wasn't just spiritualized away. It wasn't canceled, it wasn't replaced, it was expanded, it was magnified, and it was fulfilled on a cosmic scale. From a tiny piece of land in the Middle East to the whole shebang, all of a renewed creation.
And that all brings us to one last thought, a question to kind of leave you with. If our ultimate eternal home isn't some far-off disembodied heaven, but a renewed physical earth right here in the presence of God, well, how should that change the way we live on this one, right here and right now?